Hey friends, I just wanted to go through super quick and talk about how I made just like a very simple fetch to the transistor.fm API to fetch the list of podcast episodes so that I could list them on my personal site. So here I show kind of like, contact info and then recent videos from YouTube. So I'm doing kind of something similar with YouTube, and we'll talk about that maybe in a future episode. But here under the podcast episodes, I wanted to just show, the title and the date of the podcast with a link. And when you click on the link, it brings you over to the hosted embeddable player where our podcast plays. So this is Avila Theory, the Avila Theory podcast. And I just want to talk a little bit about how I made this work from the transistor.fm API. I kind of think it's a nice little, it's super nice to work with. So I had to request an API key, and I think that might be self-serve now, but it wasn't at the time. So I've got my API key from the dashboard, and my personal site is an 11T. I don't know actually how you actually say that. It's one of these 11T static site generators. So you can go into site data, and then in dev, I have this in prod, I have this transistor.js file. And we need to just return a function that will return a promise. And when the promise resolves, that will resolve with the data that we're trying to fetch. So here, what I wanted to do was just kind of walk through how easy this was. And so from the transistor FM API documentation here, you can see how, all the endpoints follow this similar JSON spec. You can make really simple curl requests to test it out and just see like what data you get back. And yeah, so like I'm using this episodes endpoint, so V1 episodes, and passing in our show ID just for the one show that we care about, pagination per. And so I think when I originally wrote this, I definitely missed the fields thing, so we can get back sparse fields. Maybe that didn't exist when I first implemented it, but I wanted to update the script that I have now so that it will fetch just the fields that I care about to minimize data that's flying around. So the first thing I want to do is just come over here and paste in the URL that I'm fetching. So this is V1 episodes. So this is there's no client library or anything. It's super simple to fetch this stuff. And then we need to say module.exports, and this is going to return a function, or this is going to be a function that returns a promise. Now, we could just, I think we can return the result of an Axios request. So I'm going to use Axios here. And yeah, so generally what I need to do is just say like return Axios, or I guess if we make this async await Axios.get, and then we're going to pass in the URL. And then after the URL, the way that you authenticate requests is not by passing any token in the URL, but in the header, instead in the header. So we're going to specify headers here, and those are going to be X API key, and I've stored the API key in my environment variables. Transistor key, and then I'm deploying this to Netlify, and inside of Netlify you can like set up your keys there. I'm not going to show what those look like, but I did want to show that I had to do something interesting in 11t.js. So I have my environment, my API keys in this .env file. I'm not going to show it because it's got my API keys. But in order to load the environment variables from .env, I needed to require .env and call config here so that it would load them when I'm either seeding or I'm in the dev environment. So I have this call here loading so that I have access to these environment variables the same way that I will in production. And the other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to see, let's see, so from index.md, this is where I'm actually using this. So podcast episode. So I'm using the share URL, the title, and the formatted published at and the non-formatted published at. So let's see if we can get this out of it. So fields, episode, title, summary. Okay, so I think what I want to do is just from inside of this call. Actually, you know what I need? I need to return a new promise because I want to do two things here. I want to not just fetch it, but I also want to call a seed function that will seed the data into this JSON file. And so the way that I want to do that is I'm going to return a new promise. And a promise takes a function that will accept two arguments, resolve and reject. And we need to call resolve when we have some non-error result, and then reject if we have an error result. So here, instead of making this async, I'm just going to say axios.get the URL. And then I'm passing in some headers with these options. And then I do want to call, a little bit. Okay. If we get a response, then we want to call resolve with the response.data. If we don't get a response, or if we get a failure from the API, we want to catch that, and we'll just say reject, and we'll pass in the error, and that should be good. All right, so we're authenticating our request, we're resolving with some data, and then the one other thing that I wanted to do is seed the data into that like local JSON file, or the dev JSON file. So I'm going to call seed and pass in response, or json.stringify response.data. I think I can make this null too. And then in order to, or seed also takes like the path to the file that we want to seed. So I'm going to pass in this dir name thing, and it's going to be up and over into dev transistor.json. Okay, so this seed function is just a utility that comes from utils saveseed.js. Okay, so I'm going to run yarn seed, and we should see if this works. Okay, so it says data is saved for my Goodreads, Transistor, Twitter, YouTube, and okay, so let's go take a look at Transistor. Okay, cool. So this is all the data that came back, and it's formatted. So that's super cool. So it was that easy. We were making fetches to the Transistor API with our API key. Obviously, you could like hard code your API key here. This is just a string that you can get from the Transistor FM dashboard. But I wanted to, what I wanted to do was play around with this ability to filter by fields. So I want to say fields episode, and then pass in title, because I'm using the title. And I also want published at fields episode published at. And I also want the formatted published at. And let's just see if this works. One of the things I don't like about this seed process, I don't know if it's part of cross-end or where it comes from. It was like part of the 11t theme that I installed, is that it runs the seeder for every single thing. I want to be able to just say like, run it just for Transistor. Or run it just for X seed. Oh, sweet. Okay, so it totally worked. So I only got back what I wanted, the title, the published at, and the formatted published at. So let's go to yarn dev and just like fire it up locally and see if I'm missing any data. Recent videos. podcast episodes, the links. Ooh, we missed the link. Okay, so I think it's called share URL. Let's pull that. And fields, episode, share URL. I knew that because okay, so how did I know? When I hover over the link in the bottom left, I see localhost 8080. So when it's trying to render the share URL attribute of this object, nothing is coming back. So, okay, cool. Wow, it refreshed the browser and it's already working. So this link totally works. Super cool. So that is like super basic stuff about, the transistor.fm website, or about transistor.fm API. I don't like how this looks. It's super messy, but that's just like Axios problem. Also, I can probably just say like const response await axios.get URL, and then maybe I should just store this request options thing up here. Const rec options, because we really only need to load it once. We don't need to load it for every API call. And then here, this gets simplified to rec options. And then I can say like this call this seed function. Cool. And then return response.data, and then make this like async. And let's see. Missed one. All right, I'm just going to run the same thing again, the seed, and see if it works. Nice. I think it totally worked. So that's like a prettier way of doing it. Let's check. Yeah, cool. We've got our data. It's just exactly what we need and nothing more and nothing less. I love that. It's like, the poor devs GraphQL API. I love being able to just pass in kind of like the fields that you want. The Stripe API is something similar with expand, but yeah, kudos to John and Justin for adding that feature. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to show. Just like a quick overview of how to build with the Transistor FM API. See you next time.